Welcome to the General's Lady, our Women's History Month program here at Washington's headquarters, State Historic Sites. I am the site manager, Elise Goldberg. Just to give you some background on Washington's headquarters, we opened in 1850 as the first publicly owned historic site in the nation. We were the longest of Washington's headquarters. He was here for 16 and a half months, and his wife, Martha Washington, was here for 12 of those months. While he was here, he did many things. He created the Badge of Military Merit, which is the forerunner of the Purple Heart that we know today. He squelched a potential mutiny that's known as the Newburgh Conspiracy, and he also went about the business of disbanding the Army at the end of the war. If you haven't been here, I hope that you do come visit us. Contact information for the site will be at the end of the program. But let's get started. Today we have a special treat for you. Jessie Serfilippi, who is a historic interpreter at Schuyler Mansion, State Historic Site in Albany, New York, will be speaking about Elizabeth Schuyler Hamilton, who is the wife of Alexander Hamilton. She worked for many years as the keeper of his legacy, deciding what to preserve and what not to preserve of his papers, and it's basically shaped how we understand Alexander Hamilton today. So without further ado, sit back and enjoy Who Tells Your Story? Elizabeth Schuyler Hamilton and the Hamilton Legacy.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me here today virtually. My name is Jessie Serfilippi, and I'm an interpreter at Schuyler Mansion State Historic Site in Albany, New York. I will just give our mansion a brief plug. If you are interested in visiting, we are open from mid-May until the end of October, and you can just give us a call at 518-434-0834 to see what tours we're offering and how we are offering them this season. So we do invite you to come visit us there. Now, today's talk specifically focuses on Elizabeth Schuyler. She is most famously known as Elizabeth Schuyler Hamilton because she married Alexander Hamilton. She was the second child of Major General Philip Schuyler and Catherine Van Rensselaer, and she is somewhat of a legacy keeper for Hamilton. She's someone who really shaped how history was told, specifically for her family, but through what she did, we can see broader implications from what was the 18th century telling history in the 19th century and how that has impacted the 20th and 21st century tellings of that 18th century history. So before we get into the talk itself, I just want to bring up the quote at the bottom of the screen. It actually comes from the now very famous Hamilton musical, and this is said in the song right as Alexander Hamilton is dueling Aaron Burr, and everything is paused for a moment. The bullet is slowly coming at him, and Hamilton asks, "What is the legacy?" and says, "It's planting seeds in a garden you never get to see." So Eliza, Alexander Hamilton, the Washingtons, the Schuylers, all these founding families were very aware they were leaving behind a legacy, not only in their public papers, but in their political and private papers as well. Hamilton here is acknowledging that he will not get to see what his legacy is. But Eliza, who outlives him by 50 years, is really going to guide that legacy. What seeds her husband planted while he was alive, she will shape into the garden she wants to see. And we're going to get kind of a glimpse into how she does that through this talk and how that has impacted the way we tell history today. But before we can get into Eliza as a legacy keeper, we do have to just go over what happened before she became the keeper of Hamilton's legacy. She faced great tragedy. She faces the death of her husband after he duels Aaron Burr in Weehawken, New Jersey on July 11th, 1804. He died the following day from the wounds he sustained during that duel. And Eliza was left in a lot of grief following this duel. She did not know what was about to happen. She was completely blindsided by it. And Daniel Ogden, a family friend, actually records something Eliza says to a mutual friend, Gouverneur Morris, right after Hamilton's death. She goes up to him, and as Daniel Ogden recalls, she says the poor woman was almost distracted and begged Uncle Gouverneur Morris might come into her room. She burst into tears, told him he was the best friend her husband had, begged him to join in her prayers for her own death, and then be a father for her children. So through this quote, we really get an idea of her mindset, where she was at when Hamilton died, the fact that she herself wished she was dead, and that her husband's friend, Gouverneur Morris, would raise her children. Now, Eliza actually ends up coming to Albany, to Schuyler Mansion, within some days following the duel, and staying with her father for about 2 months. And they were both dealing with a lot of grief at this point. Hamilton's death wasn't the only death they had faced recently. In 1801, Eliza's younger sister, Margaret, or as she's famously known, Peggy Schuyler, died at the age of only 42 of what was likely stomach or uterine cancer. That same year, Eliza lost her eldest son, Philip, at the age of 19. He was dueling for his father's honor in almost the same location his father will later duel Aaron Burr. In 1802, Eliza's 11-year-old nephew, Alexander Church, died. In 1803, Catherine Van Rensselaer Schuyler, Eliza's mother, died of what was likely a stroke very unexpectedly at the age of 69. And then in 1804, July of that year, Alexander Hamilton died, and that November, her father, Philip Schuyler, died as well. So this was a lot of grief for Eliza to go through, but she also had a lot to live for and a lot to do. For example, she had to raise 7 surviving children, the youngest of whom was only a toddler when his father died. She also had a lot of debt to deal with because Hamilton had lived far above his means and left her in so much debt that family and friends actually started a private subscription fund, which on my tours I usually say is basically the 19th century version of a GoFundMe, to help her get out of debt and actually help her keep the family home, the Grange. Otherwise, it would have been sold at public auction. And Eliza will also use the time after Hamilton's death to do some of her most famous work, which is co-founding the first private orphanage in New York City just 2 years after his death. Then it was called the Orphan Asylum. Now it still exists as the Graham Windham Foundation. And she actually did serve as its first directress starting in 1821. And she stepped down at the age of 94. So she served as first directress for a really long time, stepping down only after her daughter kind of forced her to, I guess you could say, in a way. And that was a major part of her life. But even with that, she was still dealing with a lot of pain from the loss of losing her husband. She actually says to the man who has served as Hamilton's second or his advisor during the duel, Nathaniel Pendleton, she writes to him, "I have remarked to you that I have had a double share of blessings, and I must now look forward to grief. For such a husband, his spirit is in heaven, and his form in the earth, and I am nowhere any part of him is." This is a really poetic summation of the grief that she goes through over the next 50 years of her life. So even while she is working for the orphanage and while she is kind of preserving and shaping Hamilton's legacy, she's doing this because she misses Hamilton and she wants his work preserved. And we're going to see that come up over and over again in some of the quotes we have from her. So in addition to working for the orphanage, the other largest thing Eliza does is preserves, protects, and in some ways shapes Alexander Hamilton's legacy. And we're going to start taking a look at that right now. In 1807, Eliza goes to the man we heard about earlier, Gouverneur Morris, who she had gone to and begged to pray for her own death with him. And she actually asked him to look over Hamilton's papers. We can see Gouverneur Morris here. And the way we know about this is through his journal. If you haven't read his journal, I recommend it. It's actually pretty funny, but it also gives us a really good look into his daily life. And in this case, it helps us see what Eliza was doing. He records that she and her son James, who would have been 19 at that point, have come to dine with him, and the fact that he uses the word find implies that this may have been an unexpected visit. And then less than or about a week later, he writes, he has sent for Hamilton's papers, which I have promised to examine and select such as ought not to fall into the hands of those who might publish them. And this quote is so important. It's going to come up again later on, because as early as 1807, just a few years after Hamilton's death, they are looking through his papers and choosing those they do not want published. So the tailoring of his legacy is starting very early on, and this would have been started by Eliza. She chooses Gouverneur Morris to go through Hamilton's papers, which she had a lot of, and she needed help organizing. And she would be the one making that request to choose the papers that the public should never see. Now, Eliza returns for dinner with her son William, who was about 10, less than a month after she first stopped by with her son James. Maybe she's checking in on the progress that Gouverneur Morris is making. And then Gouverneur Morris records speaking to a man named Dr. Mason about Hamilton's papers. And Dr. Mason expresses an interest in writing his history, meaning Hamilton's history. And Gouverneur Morris says he understands it is proper, and he has promised to examine Mason's work as he works on the biography. So we're actually meeting our first biographer here, and we'll get into him a bit more in just a moment. This is one of my favorite quotes from his diary. On Monday, February 15th of 1808, Morris writes, "Finish this day the tedious task I had imposed on myself." So he is finally done going through all of Hamilton's papers. Hamilton definitely wrote a lot that would have been a very daunting task, to say the least. And on top of that, he is also picking out papers that should not be put into the public eye. So now Eliza has Hamilton's organized papers, and she even has a lead on a first biographer, Dr. Mason, who is also a reverend and provost of Columbia University, which was Hamilton's alma mater, and we can see him right here. Eliza is pretty excited about working with him. She gives him all the papers that were in her possession, and she encourages him to reach out to family and friends to get more information about Hamilton, and she's going to do the same. But one of the reasons that she chooses Mason is because of how close he was to Hamilton. He was actually Hamilton's friend while Hamilton was still alive. Hamilton called upon him to give him his final communion on his deathbed, but Mason actually refused to, because he said it wasn't the custom of his church to give communion outside of church. But from this quote, we can see that that was likely truly a religious issue and not a personal thing, because following Hamilton's death, Mason really believes there is no one who can compare to Hamilton. He says, "I say nothing too strong when I assure you that, all things considered, the loss of Washington was light in comparison with this. The death of Major General Alexander Hamilton has created a waste in the sphere of intellect and probity which a century will hardly fill up. He has left none like him, no second, no third, nobody to put us in mind of him. So you can see why Eliza would be pretty pleased with him as a biographer. He shares her love and enthusiasm for Hamilton. He knew him while he was still alive. He's a very good first choice. And Eliza eagerly jumps in, helping out herself, and writes to her youngest sister, Katie. That's Katie at the age of about 29, holding her daughter, Catherine. I do want to note there are 24 years between Katie and Eliza. So we're going to hear about Katie a lot because she eventually becomes Eliza's only surviving sibling, and she is the one she writes to the most about the work she is doing. And she makes requests of Katie as well. Here, she is asking Katie if she will help give her some information on her memories of Hamilton. She writes, "My dear sister, I'm happy to be able to inform you in confidence that I shall have a prospect soon of seeing my dear husband's life in the press. The writer is very anxious to have domestic anecdotes, indeed anything illustrative of his character. I know the pleasure that you will take in granting my request, and beg you will, on receiving this, make a memorandum of all your recollections of him." And she's going to repeat this request of Katie a few times, but this is the first time she makes it. And we should note that Katie would have been in her early 20s when Hamilton died, so her memories of him are mostly going to be from her youth. She actually wasn't even born when Eliza married Hamilton, but Eliza is turning to her nonetheless for whatever memories she may have of Hamilton so that they can be in this biography as well. Now, things do not remain well between Eliza and Mason. Mason works on the project for about 10 years, and at that point, his health begins to fail, and Eliza is not too pleased with his progress. So she writes again to Katie, and she says, "I have been so disappointed by the promise of Mr. Mason in writing the life of your brother that I requested his papers to be returned to here. I have fortunately selected a very fashionable character who will devote himself to it, a Mr. Hopkinson, now in Congress, formerly resident of Philadelphia, now of New Jersey." So Eliza has effectively fired Mason. He may have quit due to health issues, but he may also have been fired by her. And she's already chosen her next biographer, who we can see right here. And Hopkinson, Joseph Hopkinson, is a member of the U.S. House of Representatives, and he is eventually a judge in Pennsylvania as well. And he begins working on the project in 1819. And he seems pretty eager about it, but he isn't going to work on it for too long. But while he is working on it, Eliza is helping. This time, maybe because of how long Mason worked on it, she is even more active in what she's doing to get this biography done. She writes to Katie again, saying that while Hopkinson is working on it, she has been very much occupied in enduring to obtain all that I can. I've been to Mount Vernon, to Bedford, and Long Island on the same subject. Mount Vernon is definitely the most notable of these mentions, because that would have been quite a trip for Eliza to make. She's in her 60s at this point. She's living in New York, but she goes down to Virginia and she meets Bushrod Washington, who was then the owner of Mount Vernon, one of Washington's nephews, and they strike up a friendship and correspondence that continues after she leaves Mount Vernon, and she goes there to get any papers she can to give to Hopkinson as he works in this biography. She's even writing to some of Hamilton's other colleagues. She writes to Samuel Jones, and she asks if he can give her Hamilton's speech that he had once made on, quote, the import and what he had thought of the independence of Vermont. So not only is she going around collecting papers in general, she's seeking out specific papers as well. So we can really see her role in shaping this biography and in helping to create Hamilton's legacy, even though she is not the person writing it ultimately. Now, like I said, Hopkinson doesn't remain on the job for too long. Why, we're not too sure. He also seemed to have ill health, but suddenly in 1821, he has stopped working on the biography, and now she is going to hire her next biographer, Timothy Pickering. And Timothy Pickering is a really good choice, at least in the eyes of, I would say, modern historians. Timothy Pickering had served on he served in many different capacities during his life. He was actually Secretary of War, Secretary of State, Postmaster General. He was a senator and representative from Massachusetts. So he was a pretty good choice in writing this biography, both from all the positions he had held during his lifetime and from a modern historian's point of view. Looking at how he approached this biography, he really seemed to be approaching it in an honest manner. I apologize for the noise you might be hearing. That is my turtle. So Timothy Pickering is right away writing to some of Hamilton's friends. Most notably, he is writing to Hamilton's former college roommate, Robert Troup, and he is asking for all the details on Hamilton's life. And this is something other biographers and Eliza do not do. He isn't only looking for the good aspects of Hamilton's life, he's looking for the whole of it, which is not incredibly common in this time period, because we should note that Eliza is not the only person who is trying to get this biography written on her husband, on one of the founders. This is a very common thing to be happening in the 19th century, which I'll touch upon a bit later. But usually these biographies are really about how great these founders were. Timothy Pickering, though, he doesn't seem to be going in that direction with his biography. And I say seem to be going because sadly he died in 1829 and he never got to finish the project. It would have been very interesting to see where he went with it, but I will say Eliza, who had the ultimate control over the project, may not have ever let it go to press if it went the way it seemed to be going. So after his death, Eliza turns to a man named Francis Baylis. And Baylis was a member of the U.S. House of Representatives, and he seemed, again, like a good choice to write a biography on her husband. For a while, they're very eagerly exchanging papers, books, and letters, and maybe after nearly 2 decades of trying to find a biographer, Eliza thinks maybe this is the one who will write that really good biography on her husband, who will get the job done. And at first, things seem to be going quite well. She writes again to Katie, and she says to her, "My dear sister, it is with great pleasure I can inform you that the biography of your affectionate brother has been commenced by a gentleman, Mr. Baylis. I think you will be pleased with his style. Let me request you to give me all the pleasing sayings that you have heard Hamilton make. Your attentive mind, I think, has good things in store for me." So once again, she's asking Katie for some help there. And we don't know what Katie sends. We actually don't have many letters from Katie, to be quite honest with you, that we know of. But Eliza is making this request again. And she also writes to Baylis around the same time. And she says, "I learn with pleasure the progress you have made in the biography." So everything seems to be going very well for a while between them. But there is a reason there was so much turnover with the biographers. And we see that especially in Eliza's relationship with Francis Baylis, because in April of 1830, she has a contract drawn up between the two of them. And I'm a writer myself. I will say this contract is rather intense, to say the least. And from Eliza's point of view, she may have done this because of all the turnover with the previous biographers. She might want to make sure Bailey's really will get this job done. But from Bailey's point of view, I can see where this might have been a bit daunting, to say the least, maybe a bit of a red flag. So in this agreement, Eliza stipulates that she must approve the final biography before any part of it can be published. And Bailey's must change anything Eliza wants changed. Now, if he doesn't agree with the change, they will then take 1 to 3 outside people they'll mutually agree upon and allow them to make the ultimate decision on whether or not whatever the thing in question is should be changed. Bailey's has to write 3 to 4 volumes, and each volume has to be between 375 to 475 pages long. Eliza also gets to decide how much text from Hamilton's actual papers gets to be used in the biography. And this is a really interesting clause because I would imagine that it's not so much about how much of the text there is, but which parts of the text there is. We have to remember, as early as 1807, current Gouverneur Morris are choosing which parts of Hamilton's biography should not be mentioned. So it seems to be a continuing theme here in this contract she's drawn up between her and Francis Baylis. Now, she promises him she'll publish at least 2,000 copies of the biography, and she is using her own money to do so. So once she breaks even, she will then pay Baylis $2,000. And maybe most importantly, she stresses Hamilton's papers belong to her no matter what the outcome of the biography is. Now, Eliza signs this contract, but Baylis does not. And this contract really offers us a glimpse into how controlling she was over Hamilton's legacy. And this isn't just something I'm saying as a modern historian. This was actually well known within her own lifetime. A man named Rudolph Bunner writes a letter to Bailey secretly. He sends it to him through a mutual friend and warns Baylis about how controlling Eliza can be over Hamilton's legacy the very same year she has this contract drawn up. And Rudolph Bunner is actually a member of the family. He's an extended member of the Schuyler family because he had married the Schuyler's eldest daughter, Angelica, Angelica's daughter, Eliza Matilda. So he is effectively Eliza's nephew-in-law. And he says he respects and admires Hamilton. He had during his life, and he does after in his death. He had even gone to Columbia and served as a clerk for Hamilton when he was a young up-and-coming lawyer. So he had worked very closely with him. But that doesn't prevent him from seeing the truth about what this project really is. In his letter to Baylis, he writes this quote. He says, "The Hamiltons would squeeze an orange and throw away the peel even when they do not want the juice. The book they want is a book to make money or political influence for the family." So he is truly warning Baylis about what this project is all about. And maybe this letter is why Baylis doesn't sign the contract Eliza has drawn up. We'll never really know why he doesn't sign it. But over the next few years, we see him work less and less on this project. And in 1834, Eliza seems pretty fed up with the whole thing, and she writes this letter to Bailey. She's pretty blunt in this letter. She says, "The tenor of your last letter, your long silence to the other circumstances, have, I confess, induced one to fear that something may have occurred to arrest your labors. If that is so, or if it is found impractical for you to proceed, let me, I pray you, be informed that I may compensate your past trouble and put the papers without delay in other hands. I am thus frank and explicit because I am hourly admonished that my life is drawing to a close, and I am impatient to fulfill the sacred duty I owe to a beloved husband's memory. So she tells Bailey's either keep working on it or give me the papers back. And he does give her the papers back because she effectively fires him after this letter is written. So you might be wondering, who is going to write this biography? Well, before I reveal the final biographer, let's take a trip down memory lane and see the hired and fired Hamilton biographers. So in 1807, Gouverneur Morris very kindly organizes Hamilton's papers for Eliza with the idea in mind that he is taking out any that should not be in the public view. Dr. Reverend Mason is chosen that same year to be the first biographer. He is then either fired or quits due to his ill health. And in 1818, Joseph Hopkinson takes over the project. He is either fired or quits as well. And in 1821, Timothy Pickering eagerly takes on the project. He sadly dies in 1829, at which point we get Francis Baylis, who, as we just saw, is effectively fired after he becomes inactive with the project. So our final biographer is, well, there's no one better than family. He is John Church Hamilton, one of Eliza's sons. He promises to take on the task of writing this biography of his father. So even though now her own son is working on the biography, Eliza does not stop her own efforts in shaping this biography. So we can see that she writes to Katie again with one of the things that she really wants to see done. She says, I am again endeavoring to get the papers of your brother before Congress, either to purchase or aid me in having them printed. My success is doubtful, but I'm doing it that the world may learn what he has done. And I always say that's kind of Eliza's thesis statement. She's doing this that the world may learn what he has done. She wants the world to know all the great things her Hamilton did while he was alive. And this is one thing that she does get to see accomplished during her lifetime. She sees his correspondence, his political writings, some of his private writings as well, the ones that she chooses, published by what eventually becomes a Library of Congress. And we can see that right here. Her son is the one who gets this done in 1850 to 1851, and she is still alive to see this published and to know that the selected papers of Hamilton can now be read by the public. But sadly, Eliza does not live to see that biography she worked so hard for written. She will die before her son is able to publish the final biography. She did see a glimpse of it because in the 1840s, her son did write a one-volume biography on Hamilton, but almost every single copy of it was lost when the place where it was being bound after being printed burnt down. So pretty much every volume was lost. We can see one that survives here. So they don't publish that version. And it will take John Church Hamilton a while to write the biography. In fact, after his mother's death, his own sister, Eliza, has to kind of poke and prod at him saying, hey, remember, you promised mom you would do this. And in the end, he comes through for her and he writes a 7-volume long biography on his father. And this is the first biography to exist on Alexander Hamilton and is really one of the foundations for Hamilton scholarship. Now, it does contain a skew because, as we've seen, Eliza and now John Church Hamilton, her son, they're going to have a kind of specific view of Hamilton. Eliza is his wife. I often ask when we would do our Hamilton focus tours, one of my questions to the group would be, now who here would write a tell-all biography on their spouse? And only once did I have someone raise their hand. I don't know how things went for that guy that night, but it did make everyone in the group laugh. Everyone kind of says, yeah, I wouldn't write that tell-all biography. So Eliza is in a way understandably holding things back, but she is doing this to the detriment of future generations. And there is one major topic on which Hamilton's papers are very silent to the point where it is pretty odd and noticeable. And that's the topic of slavery. We can see one very good example of this with a letter from Philip Schuyler, his father-in-law. So Schuyler writes to Hamilton and tells him a woman and child are engaged for him, and that a man named Mr. Whitbeck has already written to Hamilton about this and is waiting for his answer to, quote, finally conclude the bargain. Now, Hamilton's response is missing. And when I was researching, this was a red flag to me because we have so many of Hamilton's papers, especially between him and his father-in-law. They were frequent correspondence. So I wondered, well, why is this gone? And the further I looked into it, the more I realized a lot of these papers, almost every mention of slavery from Hamilton's point of view, is gone. But there is one place where they survived. It's a place no one really thinks to look, except if you're a historian, and that is Hamilton's cash books, which I know they probably sound boring, but this is where you get a lot of interesting information on someone. For example, the type of bed he bought and when he bought it, the charities he donates to, how much money he makes giving his legal opinion. All that and more are in his cash book. And it is in his cash book that we could see he paid Philip Schuyler for 2 servants roughly 6 months after Schuyler writes in that letter. And that, gap in time is very common in this time period. An even larger gap could have been expected, but he records that he is paying Schuyler for 2 servants purchased by him, Schuyler, for me, Hamilton. And the cash book is kind of a gift to historians because it is the one thing that Eliza did not touch, that her son and other biographers did not touch. It remains, as far as we can tell, fully intact. Now, we know that this editing is taking place because we can literally see it in letters. John Church Hamilton edits what is a somewhat famous letter between Alexander Hamilton and his good friend, Lieutenant Colonel John Lawrence, while they were both aides-de-camp to Washington in 1779. This is a long letter to Lawrence. It talks about politics. It also talks a bit about their personal lives. And at the end of it, there is likely an innuendo, which John Church Hamilton considered too risque, and he crosses it out so hard in black ink that it is really difficult to make out what is under that, but some people study it pretty closely and are pretty certain it's some sort of innuendo. And at the top of this letter, John Church Hamilton writes, "I must not publish the whole of this." So we can see that editing going on not only by Eliza, but by her son as well. And this leads us to that question that I asked right at the beginning: what is a legacy? Eliza was Hamilton's legacy keeper by all means. And even though she died before the biography was published, her marks remain all over modern Hamilton scholarship, even though that's not always acknowledged because she ultimately wasn't the writer of the biography, her son was. But what she did a lot, to shape how we view Hamilton for better and for worse. For example, without her insistence that his papers be organized and those that she desired to be preserved, it would be so much harder for biographers to write about him. John Church Hamilton's biography serves as a touchstone for future biographies as well. We can see some of those right here. It's like a roadmap to the biographies that will follow, this 19th century one into the 20th and even 21st century. But because they sometimes go back to this biography and rely on the papers that were culled and edited by the Hamiltons. They can sometimes contain the same skew that Eliza and her son put on Hamilton's life. But that is not true of every Hamilton biography, I should put out there. We also wouldn't have as many of Hamilton's papers safely gathered and largely stored in one location, mostly the Library of Congress in DC, but also at other archives throughout the country, making them easily accessible to historians now. So without her, we wouldn't really be able to access these papers, especially in a kind of easy manner. Working with Philip Schuyler's papers, I can tell you they're a little bit, even though they're largely in one place, they weren't ever fully organized, whereas Hamilton's papers are quite nicely organized, likely based on how Eliza had them organized early on. And we do have to remember that even though they are organized and easy for historians to get to, we are missing papers. Just like Gouverneur Morris said in 1807, they're excluding papers. As we can see, John Church Hamilton is editing papers. So what we have today, while it's very valuable, does determine some stories that do and do not make it into the mainstream narratives unless we are really looking for those stories and to bring them into that narrative. Now, Eliza will die in 1854 at the age of 97 in Washington, D.C. She had outlived Hamilton by 50 years. She remained very loyal to him over those 50 years. And she was brought back to New York City and buried in Trinity Churchyard in Manhattan next to Hamilton, where you can still visit her grave today. Perhaps now, though, the biggest thing to have come from her work is Hamilton, an American musical. You can see Philippa Sue, who originated the role of Eliza on Broadway in that image there. And the musical at the end asks us, what is a legacy? For all the good Eliza did to preserve her husband's papers and see this biography written, she and her son also tailored the narrative and left a lot of topics and people out, including slavery and the people the Hamiltons enslaved. So these important truths are removed. And it is the job of current historians to go back and to look for these truths that Eliza and her son didn't tell and to restore as much as possible the edits that were made. And we have to remember, even though I'm specifically talking about Eliza here and her editing, she and her family are not the only ones to be doing this during the 19th century. The founders, either descendants, people who were close to them, or people who really admired them, are writing similar narratives. The 19th century, as I always say, kind of skews our vision of the 18th century because, in a way, they are creating a narrative that leans pretty far one way, which would be into the good of the person they're writing about, at some points almost glorifying them. And instead of bracing the whole truth, the whole person as they really would, they lean sometimes too far into that, side of the person. And as a result, we all suffer when the whole truth of a person's life is not told. So that's why it's so important for current historians to go back and try to tell it as accurately and honestly as possible without going in with any agenda, just going in to the primary sources looking to tell the truth. And as we do this, as we create what is ultimately going to be a legacy as well, we should keep asking ourselves the same question the musical does. What is a legacy? And then also ask, how is it still being actively shaped? And even more, what role are you playing in the shaping of that legacy? So thank you so much for having me today. I am sorry I couldn't be there in person. So I do want to invite you to send us any questions you may have over our social media. You can find us on Facebook at Schuyler Mansion State Historic Site. We are also on Instagram and Twitter, very easy to find. We're just Schuyler Mansion. And you're always welcome to give us a call if you want to ask questions there as well. Thank you, and I really hope that you enjoyed this presentation.
Thank you, Jessie. I hope that all of you enjoyed that. Hello, my name is Karen Monchi, and I am a historic interpreter at Washington's headquarters State Historic Site. It's my pleasure today to be introducing the most recent awardee of our Martha Washington Woman of History Award. Now, at this time, I want to begin by saying that the Martha Washington Woman of History Award ceremony is one that is held each year. We honor a local woman who exemplifies the character of Martha Washington and who has helped to promote history and preservation in the Hudson Valley. The distinguished recipients in the past have been Janet Dempsey, Carol Ash, Patricia Favada, Barbara Bedell, Mary McTammany, Mary Maggioni, Elizabeth McKean, Mary Ann Fish, Mara Farrell, Stella Bailey, Marietta Schneider, Mary Sudman Donovan, Kathleen P. Mitchell, Willis Skinner, Denise Doring Van Buren, Mary Ellen Matisse, Dawn Elliott, Mildred Starren, Ruth Peronka, and Sue Gardner. A very impressive group of ladies. And this year we are delighted to honor another impressive woman, Nina Postupack. Nina Postupack, as Ulster County Clerk for over 40 years, has expanded and redefined the archives to educate and interpret county and local history for the public. She worked to conserve many colonial Dutch records, created document-based curriculum guides and activity booklets, developed the Ulster County Clerk's Records Donation Program, researched and delivered countless presentations in the community, and has done so much more. Laurie Hancock nominated Nina, and I'd like to welcome Laurie to speak on why she was compelled to nominate this fine lady for this award. Laurie.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for the warm welcome that we've received today. It's truly an honor to be with you all today, commemorating the remarkable Martha Washington, our first First Lady, and celebrating the illustrious career of County Clerk Nina Postupack. Nina is well known as one of Ulster County's champions of history, and for good reason. Nina began her career in the county clerk's office in 1979, and her leadership skills were quickly recognized as she was appointed deputy county clerk in 1982, and then promoted to chief deputy county clerk in 1990. And she held that position until 2005. In 2005, Nina was the first woman elected to the position of Ulster County Clerk. And since then, she has embodied the spirit of Martha Washington by preserving and promoting the vast history of Ulster County. I have worked alongside Nina for 35 years, and in that time I have watched Nina set her goals, work towards those goals, achieve those goals, and overcome the obstacles that got in her way. Nina conducts herself with an elegance and grace akin to Lady Washington, and with a grit and determination that would have made our first president proud. As the keeper of the records, Nina is tasked with protecting, preserving, and promoting the historic records of Ulster County. Being one of the 12 original counties in New York State, with Kingston being the county seat, and being one of the first 3 Dutch settlements, the historic records held in the county clerk's office are nothing short of remarkable. The Dutch records collection, consisting of the original Dutch records and the English translations that are in the county archives, date back to 1658 and contains some of the oldest and most important Dutch records in our country. Under Nina's direction and supervision, these records were conserved by Northeast Document Conservation Center. They were digitized and microfilmed, and the English translations have been data entered into an online, word-searchable database that now can be searched by researchers all over our globe. One major way that Nina promoted these records was through a permanent exhibit in the Matthias Person House Museum and Cultural Heritage Center, which is a 1661 Dutch stone house museum that is managed by the county clerk's office. The Person House opened for tours in 2010 and since has welcomed over 38,000 guests from all of our 50 states and from 59 different countries. The house acts as a cultural heritage gateway, whereby we invite cultural heritage groups from around the county to guest host on a Saturday at the house. The house has hosted over 35 different groups over the years, including reenactors, lecturers, special exhibits, art installations, and much more. Perhaps we are one of the only county clerk's offices in New York, if not the country, to manage a museum on top of the day-to-day responsibilities of the county clerk. It should be noted that the county has owned this historic house since 1914. It was used as county offices for about 85 years until 2000, when the roof began to fail. After the structure was stabilized, it was Nina who advocated to convert it into a museum and to use the house as our cultural heritage gateway. One of the main missions of the Person House and Archival Program is to promote local history to Ulster County students, our young citizens. Nina has done this by developing a 4 Kids Packet series, which helps students to understand in a fun and engaging way their local history. These publications include such topics such as archives for kids, voting for kids, Person House for kids, and 7 other packets. They have been widely popular and can be found in such places such as doctor's offices, hotels, museums, and more. In addition to these fun activity packets for kids, Nina also has facilitated the development of academic teaching curriculums for our 4th and 7th grade students. The office was awarded grants to hire educators to produce curriculums using primary documents to teach about the early Dutch era of Ulster County, the collision of cultures between the Native Americans and the European settlers, which includes lessons pertaining to artifacts from the Person House and 2 other packets. These teaching packets have been shared throughout Ulster County school districts, as well as with local libraries and parents of homeschool students. But their impact extends well beyond the borders of Ulster County. As I mentioned, the curriculum pertaining to the collision of cultures between the natives and Europeans contain lesson plans pertaining to the artifacts that were discovered through an archaeological dig at the Person House. I would like to share a short story regarding just how far beyond the borders of Ulster County this teaching packet traveled. On August 31st, 2009, I received an email from Julie Daniels, one of our colleagues from the New York State Archives, and I would like to quote the email as follows. Lori, FYI, the State Museum hosted a group of Egyptian archaeologists recently. They were traveling around the U.S. visiting museums with archaeological collections to exchange ideas. I had given Valerie Fish, science educator for the State Museum, a copy of your When Cultures Collide curriculum guide. She showed it to the Egyptian visitors, and they asked if they could keep it. They were particularly interested in how archaeology was integrated into the classroom instruction. Of all their visits to other museums, your guide was the best example they had seen. So know that your materials are now on another continent. 3 exclamation marks. So to say that the office was thrilled to receive that email from Julie is quite an understatement. The work at the county clerk's office under Nina's direction, it reaches people, it impacts people, it connects families, it inspires educators, it excites children, and it assists students. All of these publications have been incredibly successful and continue to teach and inspire young people throughout our county. But they illustrate only a fraction of the effort Nina and her staff have made to promote the local history of our area. Nina has produced over 124 exhibits that travel throughout the county, with topics ranging from the historic burning of Kingston to the doodles that we find in the margins of the historic documents. She has also given countless presentations and lectures to historic societies, school groups, senior groups, and more. And truly, the list goes on and on and on. Like all great leaders, Nina's work does not end at 5 p.m. each day. She has been a member on numerous boards and committees, including the Hudson River Maritime Museum, the Senate House State Historic Site, the Friends of Historic Kingston, Saugerties Historical Society, the Italian American Foundation, and many more. As you can probably tell by now, Nina Postupack is not only a staple in Ulster County's historical community, but in the community at large. Under her leadership, the clerk's office and archives has flourished and is now used by the New York State Archives as a model illustrating how to operate a successful records management program. Nina is one of the many Ulster County clerks who will be remembered by history for their illustrious achievements. She stands among names like George Clinton and Christopher Topham, and she does so as the first and only woman to hold that position. It has truly been my honor to serve as one of Nina's deputies, and I believe her accomplishments and career are well deserving of this award. Congratulations, Nina.
Thank you, Lori. And Nina, would you come up here, please? First of all, I have to ask you, do you ever sleep? Because if you're doing all that you're doing, I can't imagine you do.
Lori just tired me out.
Oh,
Listening to
sorry,
her.
yeah.
I agree.
Well, Nina, there are 3 things that come along with this award. Your name has been added to our Martha Washington Woman of History plaque and is located in the lobby of our museum at Washington's headquarters. You'll be able to see a little later. You now will be invited to sit in on the annual Martha Washington Woman of History Award Selection Committee and will have a say in who receives this award in the future. You're going to be the predecessor, but that individual will then be your successor. So you can choose wisely. And you also get a small gift from us, a tote. We hope you will enjoy it.
Thank you so much.
You're quite welcome. And now I am thrilled to present the Martha Washington Woman of History Award for the year 2022. And I'm going to read it for you. Washington's headquarters State Historic Site, Newburgh, New York, 2022. Martha Washington Woman of History Award presented to Nina Postupack in recognition and appreciation of her extraordinary contribution to the advancement of Hudson Valley history through education, preservation, and promotion.
Thank you so much, Karen.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Absolutely beautiful.
Would you like to say a few words?
I would.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. First, I must say, I am completely overwhelmed by Lori's words, by being the recipient of this most prestigious award. I'd like to thank Elise Goldberg, who is the site manager of Washington's headquarters, and the selection committee for selecting me for this honor. As someone who's been involved in history and the historical community for years, I'm humbled to be part of a group of highly respected, outstanding women who have received this award. To be included with these women who are historians, educators, authors, journalists, preservationists, community activists, and a New York State Commissioner, all promoting the history of the Hudson Valley, is truly an honor I will never ever forget. My greatest joy over the years is having the ability to promote our history through the primary documents that exist in our office. Through these documents, we tell a story. And whether it's creating an exhibit, producing a teaching packet, establishing a collaboration with other historical organizations, uncovering documents that we did not know existed, or opening a cultural gateway museum, the excitement of sharing this story, our history, is always, always there. This is what makes what I do so very special. There's 3 individuals that came with me today, and they're the team behind all that we have accomplished in sharing Ulster County's history. First of all, thank you, Lori, to Lori Hancock, for the kind words. They meant so much to me. And as Lori said, we've been together for quite a few years, over 35 years. But most of all, thank you for supporting the records management program and the archives, believing in our mission and telling the story of our county. Thank you so much, Lori. And to Alice Lawless, our Chief Deputy County Clerk, thank you for always believing in the program. And Alice and I have been together for over 40 years. So you can see we don't leave the county clerk's office once we come there. Alice motivated me and encouraged me when it was difficult at times. Always there, the guiding light, working for the betterment of the program. So Alice, thank you so, so much. And Alice and Roy were there from the inception of the Ulster County Archives, when it was only an idea on a piece of paper. With their help and guidance, we were able to grow our archives into the vibrant, active program that it is today. And that truly was an accomplishment, because it really was an idea that the 3 of us sat down and wrote down what the records management and archives could be in Ulster County. And to Taylor Bruck, who brings energy, creativity, and enthusiasm to our program, and youth, something that the 3 of us can truly use. The addition of Taylor as our county archivist has added a completely new dimension to the archives. And this award would not be possible. This is an award that I share with these individuals because this award would never been possible without this team accomplishing what we did with the archives. And finally, you know, I was thinking back today, and I thought to myself, how symbolic that today we're standing here honoring Martha Washington. As we're living through these difficult times that our country is facing, unprecedented events that have affected each and every one of us on a daily basis, let us be inspired by the determination and courage of Martha Washington as she lived through challenging and demanding times for our country's battle for democracy. Let us continue her legacy by telling the story of the history of our great country. So thank you so much to everyone here in this room. Thank you to Elise and to the staff for believing in me, and thank you so much for this incredible, incredible honor that will always be so special to me in my heart. So thank you.
You know what, before you go up, let's show everybody what your pockets.
Yes. And can I open my gift so I
Oh,
can show
I'm sure you
everyone?
can.
Okay, all right. I'm excited. It's always fun to get a gift.
I think it makes for interesting.
Oh, so Martha Washington. Oh, this is so nice. And the plaque is so beautiful.
Yeah. You want to step over to the sheet? There you go. There you go.
Thank you all so very much.
And I want to thank you very much and say congratulations on behalf not only of myself but also of my coworkers in voting for, I think, a very impressive individual. I hope you'll be a very integral part of our site.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Congratulations, Nina, on the Martha Washington Woman of History Award. Congratulations, well deserved. Before we close, I just want to thank the Palisades Interstate Parks Commission, the Palisades Parks Conservancy, and the Friends of the State Historic Sites of the Hudson Highlands for making programs like this possible. And if you haven't been to Washington's headquarters in person, I urge you to come down and visit us. Hope you enjoyed the program. See you soon.